imagine if like infidelity was made like illegal. Like, how would that change things? And it wouldn't happen because there's so much like it is. I don't think it's in favor of the people in power. I don't, and it's also like should there be a like a more should it be like the responsibility of the state to prevent that from happening? I don't know, but that would be interesting.
Yeah, that'd be interesting for. It's a tough one, isn't it? Because how many things that are illegal are actually illegal? Like, actually, a police person will, you can call the police and they'll come and they'll arrest you. Is it? Would we put then infidelity on the same level as like murder or rape when these things are taken much more seriously than, say, I don't know, the use of marijuana or weed that is illegal, but police aren't coming to your door arresting you about that shit. So it depends what level of illegality we'd be talking about with that. But yeah, it's interesting, man. Like I remember Jordan Peterson talking about, or just playing with the thought of divorce being impossible and what world we'd live in if divorce wasn't possible. When you married someone, you married them and you stuck with them. And he was like, address the fact that yes, there would be horrible abusive relationships where that rule would do damage, but there's also a lot of places where people would, when you got married, you took it fucking seriously, and it's like, okay, now I'm going to try and really keep this marriage stable and work hard on it. And that's obviously requires a very optimistic view of humans and human nature, and it would be very, very good for children. But yeah, interesting questions. On the point of what do I think will be seen as immoral in the future that is seen as okay now, the only thing that came to my mind is I think perhaps in the future we'll look back on how algorithms and AI is used to capture people's attention, and I don't know if we'll see that as in a positive light in maybe 100 years, like how the TikTok for you page is and how social media apps keep you hooked and things. We might look back on that and go, we prioritized profit and sort of capitalist motivation over quality of life of the masses and people sort of having agency and keeping hold of their attention span. Like there might be a world when we look back on this era and go, this was the era where big corporations damaged people's lives and they didn't realize it because we sort of felt like we're compelled to do this stuff. We're compelled to doom scroll. We're compelled to go down YouTube rabbit holes. And maybe we'll look back on this era and go, was that the best thing for humanity?
Yeah, I see. I see a lot of the most like powerful kind of forces in the world. So the way I see it, one of the most powerful things is God. The other thing that comes close to it is love and maybe knowledge. Those are really the top three that I can think of. That the whole world runs around those. They're in every kind of human, and they're that they can like be such a reason for why people act. And I
How
feel
are you?
like
Can I just jump in and say how are you defining God in this context? Because it'd be useful for people.
um,
Because I
I,
think I know what you mean, but I don't think people listening will know what you mean.
I'll use your definition of the spirit that possesses you when you make moral decisions, like good decisions, or how you feel when you've done something good.
Also, can I just add that's not me, that's Peterson. I'm just
Okay. So, and so with these couple forces, well, what are we doing right now? Well, Nietzsche found God's body a couple hundred years ago, and that's kind of. Do I feel like people are not particular? How do I feel about people morally? I think everyone's got some darkness in them, and everyone's got some done some shit, and yeah, I don't think maybe people are as morally good as they were a couple. Well, I don't know. Actually, that's quite a difficult question. But I'll comment on the other two. I think love is dying, and I think it's being killed by hedonism, and I think it's being killed by technology, decreasing the collection, and I think knowledge is being killed as well because all these kids growing up nowadays, they are being, they're not loving learning. I don't think they're not taught the quest for knowledge in schools, and so then they go home and consume TikTok knowledge. It's
And you can outsource your thirst, well, your capacity to acquire knowledge to like AI, large language
yeah,
models, and Google and shit. There's like, I think about reading Carl Jung's autobiography, and he talked about when he was in his late teens, early 20s, and he was really grounding his knowledge in sort of the fundamentals of psychology and mythology and philosophy. He spent hours and hours in libraries, reading the core texts themselves. And there's a side to it where you can argue, oh, it's so great that we have knowledge at such arm's length, and we can just type a sentence into ChatGPT and get a kind of response. But I don't think we ingrain knowledge quite as deeply as we would kind of in say Carl Jung's era. It's interesting.
yeah. Maybe I think we have quite a wide width of knowledge, as in we don't know the answer. We can search something up, we can find out, but there's not a lot of depth of knowledge.
Yeah.
Like someone like you look at someone like Peterson, how much depth he goes into. He knows a couple authors so well, and combines them together, and it's I think that depth of knowledge, that's what we really want. I don't think we need to know everything at such a wide level. But yeah, I'll go into the best DM that I've had, and it's a guy called Stefan, and this actually fits nicely, flowed quite nicely into the conversation. So he asked, is it possible to truly know anything, or is knowledge just a belief that we accept to be true? Now, that is a big question, and I lean very strongly towards knowledge just being a belief that we accept as true. But I thought about it, and I present both sides of the argument. So, is it possible to know anything? Here's the arguments. You've got things like science, reason, logic, proof, evidence, things like this. And you hear something like a fact, something factually true, like we're 99% similar to chimpanzees, or whatever it is.
Genetically, yeah.
Yeah, genetically. And or this place is in the 70% poverty, or this medicine will make you feel more calm. But then even with this, it's like, okay, for the medicine example, everyone's body's different, so there will be exceptions. For the statistic about poverty, for example, all they've done is taken a sample of 10,000 people, and then they kind of replicate that for a whole city, and so it got imperfections. And for the 99% identical to a chimp example, I mean, I don't really feel like 99% identified with a chimp. So yeah, that's but I think that's probably the strongest argument for do we know something, and it's this objective kind of thing we spoke about in previous episodes of, yes, these things are true because they boil down to the laws of physics, and you can't change the laws of physics. So then there's also Descartes, who famously said,
Think, therefore I am.
yeah, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. And it holds a lot of weight, and it's basically, the theory behind it is, if we can doubt everything, the fact of doubting means that I'm thinking, and if I'm thinking, then I must exist informed in order to be doubting. And so we know like, according to that, we know we exist. So we can know that, we can know it. And yeah, for me, they're the two strongest. I'll just let you comment if you wanted to before I move on to the other side.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of evidence, like you say, and I think it differs between people how we evaluate the strength of a piece of evidence. So, are you very scientifically, materialistically minded, and you go, right, if it's been demonstrated using the scientific method that these things or these laws or this phenomena objectively exists in the world, then you believe it, and it's like you know that you believe it with 100% certainty or 99.999% certainty. Whereas some people consider evidence to be how one feels. If you feel like there is a higher power or some sort of metaphysical force in the universe, then that's enough evidence for you to then believe it, and then it tips. I think there's a tipping point. Let's say, put it in a term of percentages, where you feel like you surpass a certain percentage of strength in evidence to the point where you say you'd know something rather than you believe it. So like I don't know, like the laws of physics, there's so much evidence that exists, and it would be absurd to disagree with it. You would feel it's absurd. Your society would feel it's absurd. You'd be ostracized for believing that, and so you say you know it. You feel like you know it. Where there are some things like conspiracy theories, for example, where does the strength of evidence really reach over that tipping point? Like, is it absurd to not believe it? Well, probably not. So you kind of you look at the evidence, and it doesn't quite surpass that limit where you go, okay, I know that thing is true. With things that we take as facts, I think it's because the evidence is so strong that it surpasses that tipping point where if we didn't believe it, we would think we're crazy, or we would be considered crazy by society. Does that make sense?
Mm. Yeah. The other side of things that I think holds a lot more weight is the Socratic philosophy of the more I know, the less I know. And one big thing that I know we've discussed before is cognitive biases. And I've got some lines that I read recently that Nietzsche says about it. People are going to start saying, "You're so Nietzsche heavy," and I know we are. I know we are, but I go to the coffee shop, I read 2 pages, and I think about it for an hour.
Well,
So
it's
I'd rather,
we're always biased by the thing that we're learning at the moment. Like that's
yeah.
that's always going to be. So
So he says, our eyes find it easier on a given occasion to produce a picture already often produced than to seize upon the divergence and novelty of an impression. It is difficult and painful for the ear to hear anything new. When we hear another language, we involuntarily attempt to form the sounds into words which we are more familiar with. The reader nowadays reads all the single words. He takes 5 of every 20 and guesses the probably appropriate sense to them. So what that kind of means is we rely on things we're familiar with, and kind of have them as a filter on the world through the stories that we tell ourselves.
mm-hmm.
And it's said nicely and poetically through the senses. That's why I quite like that. And then he also says about the chapter I'm reading at the moment is called something to do with scholars, and he talks about this learned man who is someone who like just accepts that something is like that he knows something for sure, that he like this sort of scientific arguments. So the learned man is full of petty envy, and he has a lynx eye for the weak points in those natures to whose elevations he cannot attain. The lynx eye implies this kind of like heightened awareness, so an ability to spot flaws in others. And these are flaws in those who have not ascended to a higher status morally or socially, which are levels that the scholar himself cannot reach. So if you think about it, like a side point from this is like Actually, I won't go into that. The learned man is confiding, yet only as one who lets himself go, but does not flow. When he shares and opens up, but is not free-flowing and expressing of himself, it's a limited, calculated release. So he kind of holds back thoughts, and perhaps in this sort of sense of fear or pride, or a sort of desire to maintain control. And practically, what does kind of all this mean that we should do practically? I think we should be this free-flowing individual of kind of accepting that we don't know anything. And the trouble is we're not really at peace ever, because there's all these values that kind of compete against each other in this fragmented culture. And there's this quote: such a man of late culture and broken lights will be on average a weak man. So all these kind of values compete against each other, the broken light symbolizing kind of a weak leading principle. And yeah, his fundamental desire is that the war within him should come to an end. I think there's a lot of people where there's just too many competing values that they don't have a North Star to properly follow. There wasn't really an argument against the belief that we accept it's true, but I think there's some points of, I don't think you want to become this guy that does just believe things and not kind of question things and tailor it towards what you actually think, and not to be able to think for yourself. But yeah,
the thing is, you need a perceptive framework to view your life. Like, you need a story to tell yourself. You need a map for the territory, because you're one little mortal individual, and you're not ready to see or to feel or to perceive the territory and the massive complexity that is the world, and that is human life, and that is this universe. So you need that. You need a framework to live your life within. A set of core beliefs, a set of core principles of what you think's going on here, who the hell you think you are, what you're supposed to do, what matters. You need that cookie cutter, because that stops you from being anxious and stops you from going crazy, literally. But you must. I think it's important, and this is maybe what philosophy is about, and what discussions like we have on this podcast are about, is you have to recognize that is where you live. You live in a perceptive framework for the world. You live within your own map. You don't live in the territory. And just an understanding that that's the case means that you can be open just slightly for that map and that narrative to change slightly as a consequence of experience. And that's really important too. That's what growth is. That's what self-discovery is. You don't want to burn the map completely. That's what sort of, I don't know, that's what mental disorder is in a lot of ways, is your map gets blown apart by trauma or by conditions like schizophrenia, etc., etc. But you do want, you kind of want a capacity for your map to evolve and to change, and be a bit formless, be like water, as Jackie Chan said, or Bruce Lee. That's Bruce Lee, not Jackie Chan. He's an actor. What Bruce Lee said about being like water and being able to sort of hold shape but then change and evolve. So it's interesting, man. It's something I think about a lot. We live in a walled garden in our own brains of our perceptions and our beliefs. But understanding that is important, I think, because then when it changes, you aren't thrust into hysteria. You're aware that, okay, the way I view reality is now changed, and that's scary, but also just a part of life.
We have to pick our cookie cutter, pick our map.
Yeah, and it also it kind of flows into a point that I had for today, which is, have I told you about an idea called negative capability? You might have heard of it before. I might have mentioned it in an episode or not. I'm not sure.
It doesn't ring a bell.
There was this poet called John Keats, a romantic poet, a couple hundred years ago, and he had this idea known as negative capability, which was he was thinking it in a kind of a literary, creative sense, but it's the ability to sit in uncertainty and ambiguity and sit in the unknown and sit in the discomfort of that and not need certainty and not need it to change. And I think that's also the case with how we think about our lives and our own perceptions of our lives and the sort of cognitive frameworks we exist within. We need to have a level of negative capability. We need to have an understanding that we don't have answers and that answers will change and will be thrust into uncertainty every so often, will be thrust into ambiguity. And it's kind of an acceptance of that philosophical discomfort, that even if you start believing one thing as like the concrete set of principles for how the universe is structured and how you should live out your life, you have to have the negative capability to understand that that might be thrown under the bus, and then you have to develop a new set of principles, or you just remain kind of formless and open to different ones. So
Yeah, it's a much better way to live. I look around and I see a lot of people living through certainty, and yeah, there isn't growth there. There isn't
no.
really growth there. But, tell me about this: find what you love and let it kill you.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a, maybe it's a bit of a wishy-washy spiritual woo-woo point. But I was thinking about what, I wasn't like, stuck thinking about this, but the other day I just sort of was questioning my own death in a way that sort of weird overthinking psychology and philosophy nerds do, reflecting on my mortality. And the thought came to me, and it's like, it's one of those situations where I don't feel like I created that thought. I feel like it just slipped into my mind through my subconscious or whatever kind of source or whatever spiritual terminology you want to use. And the thought was, if I died today, what would I regret most? And the next thought that came was that the thing I would regret most is the amount of unexpressed love that I didn't give to the world and to the people around me and through the things that I did. I didn't, the thought of, what accolades I got in sport, or, how much status I accrued, or how much money I earned, or the material things I possessed, or even the experiences I had, that stuff didn't come up. It was if you died now, you would be sad because you hadn't expressed all the love that you could possibly express in your life. And that's maybe because I'm a 20-year-old and I haven't really done anything yet. And there's a future in front of me that hopefully contains a healthy marriage and children, and that's sort of like the core of the romantic and fatherly love in my life. But also, I think it applies to everything that I do. Going through life with this compassionate, empathetic, loving philosophy could be really powerful. And I think about it in terms of my friendships as well, the platonic love involved in that, and the work that I do, and the way that I want to affect people positively, whether that's in the basketball world or through the podcast or through studying psychology and learning about mental health and all these kind of things. And it sort of, I think now you might be able to tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but I think Lex Friedman had this idea once, or it's come through a lot of his work, that he said, "Can you do everything out of love?" He asked that question. Can you do everything in your life from a place of love? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy or beautiful or fun, because love can be painful, man. Love can cut deep. It's the maybe deepest human emotion. On the other side of it is a lot of pain. And then I thought about Bukowski's quote that I think is very powerful, where he said, "Find what you love in life and let it kill you." And that's a great way to die. Imagine that, dying, because we're all going to die anyway. I think the most heroic way to die is to die giving as much love as you possibly can to the world. And I know that sounds a bit woo-woo and a bit abstract, but it resonates with me, man. So, what do you think?
Why do you feel like this is so important to you? Like, especially kind of after your experience last like Friday. Like, why do you think that you're not kind of giving love to the world?
Because the human ego doesn't have that same priority. The human ego wants to do everything for its own gain, I guess, and to maintain its own control, and for that feeling of status, that feeling of power. But when you look past the ego and you come into contact with who you really are, that being, that spirit, that version of you, that higher self wants to do everything from a place of unconditional love, and maybe that is the strongest power in the universe. Maybe that is what the opposite of evil is. And I think it's important to know where your actions are really coming from on a spiritual level. And that sounds kind of weird for a 20-year-old male to be saying in the 21st century, but it's true. I could go and be an athlete and do it out of like insecurity and a drive to prove people wrong, which certainly has been a part of my development. But I could also do it for the love of the game and to treat basketball like an art form. Like I love it when I step into that mindset of God, this is a beautiful thing. This is a beautiful pattern of play. It involves physical and mental development, and it involves a kind of fusion between you and your teammates to be one kind of organism that goes out and gets a job done and performs in a spectacular fashion. When I view it through that lens, rather than the lens of I'm going to go and dominate my competition in an angry, sort of aggressive manner, and I view it as an art form and something to sort of manifest beauty and love in a kind of creative form, then that's just a better way to live life. I think it might sound very naive and optimistic and overly optimistic, I guess, but it's just been some reflections that I've had.
I think it's something that really takes your whole life to contribute, and I think it might be harder at our age because we don't have as much love to move around. We don't have as much love to give, and so
Why would you say that is, though?
resources and like just being in the world for longer and knowing about other people. Like the most we can kind of do is kind of give love to a community or to make a stranger's day better. But I don't think we have like huge resources to contribute towards like charity and decrease unnecessary suffering and to inspire. Although we maybe do to a small degree.
But are you in that idea of resources? Are you thinking about purely like monetary, like money? Like we can't pay thousands of pounds to charity, or we can't like support a family right now. Which like there's an element of that. There's an element of caregiving in that. But maybe like to find love, you can look low, you can look lower and lower and lower, and be like, well, maybe I can express love through the way that I listen to you in this conversation, and the way that I genuinely speak and act in the way that I do from a spirit of compassion and genuinely wanting the best for you, and apply that not just to our friendship, but all my friendships and the different sort of social relationships I have out in the world. It's kind of like that's a divine way to be in the world. So when Carl Jung said people struggle to find God because they don't look low enough, they're looking to the sky to find this moral divine being that sort of surveys the land and tells you how to live. But maybe God's in the way that you interact with your loved ones and strangers, and the way that you do your work, and the philosophy that you ground your work within. I don't know, man. I'm just playing with sort of abstract spiritual ideas, but it resonates.
That's cool. Yeah, I think that's one of Jung's most powerful quotes. You don't find God because you don't look low enough. You could think about that your whole life. And yeah, I think it applies to this context. There's this like 60-year-old woman on like who lives quite near me, and she's like a recovering alcoholic, and I used to see her at the coffee shop, but now I don't go there anymore. But I still see her about, and I think I'm like the only person in that day that listens to her problems for 10 minutes every morning. We happen to meet at the exact place on the same road, like every time in the morning, and that's my contribution. Like I think that's one of my contributions. I think we need to do our part, at least, and yeah, if everyone if everyone did their part, like it. I think because the world's very individualistic, there is less love, and I think the two go quite hand in hand
Mm.
to the correlation between how individualistic you are and how much love you actually contribute to others.
Yeah, and I think that comes from your ego, right? Your ego is the thing that's fueling the individualism. And that little anecdote about that lady that you chat to and you listen to her like yap for a bit, that's beautiful, man. That's not insignificant. I think it's so easy to just look past the small things that you could express love and respect in your life. You just look past it because you think it's so small. It's just some crazy lady that lives near me. But that crazy lady lives her whole independent, conscious experience from you, and you can be a small fragment, or maybe even a medium-sized, pretty significant fragment of her existence, and provide positivity and a kind of level of, you notice her, and you be just a source of joy and presence. And I think there's so many times we do that in our life, from the way that you might, I don't know, it sounds so mundane as shit, but I feel like you'll get what I mean. Like if I'm driving around every day like I do, and I let somebody go out of a junction, you know what I mean? Because I see that they're like stressed and they're like rushing to work or whatever, or like you interact with someone at a drive-through at a fast food restaurant, you can be friendly, you can smile, and there's. It sounds so corny, doesn't it? But it's real, Jacob. It's real. They are the ways that you affect the world on a small scale. And what if we didn't see these small things as small? What if we saw them as the tiny bricks that then come together and sort of form the foundation of our entire life? Like I remember, I just sound like a fucking Jordan Peterson jukebox, but screw it. Like I know that he's talked about this, his job washing dishes as a teenager, and how like he found real value in taking that a bit more seriously, and he got good at it, and he worked hard, and he was friendly to his colleagues and to his managers, and then he got promoted, and he found real value in the sort of discipline and respect for life that he got from doing that job. And so things are boring and mundane in life, and can we view them as how do I respect this more, and how do I show love and respect and gratitude in what I do? And that's obviously, that's a very maybe privileged thing to say, because my life isn't in a scary state of trauma or anxiety all the time, so I have the capacity to think these quite flowery thoughts. But I think there's some value in it.
Yeah, I think the problem that we need to overcome is we're probably not the type of person that does that in every situation and can show up like that in every situation, or as many as or a significant amount. And same with probably the people listening. And so for me to like approach the world like that takes like a lot of conscious trying, and it means that I want to really get to a stage where it's unconscious and the baseline just kind of automatically approaches the world like that, because at the moment it takes a lot of conscious, okay, I'm going to say this particular thing. Yeah,
Man, it takes courage. It does take courage. It sounds silly, but it does take courage. And it takes a good amount of mindfulness and a good amount of self-awareness, which is something you can train, but is also something that seems to, people seem to differ in. And like you say, it's not like a thing where like you flick a switch and I yap like this on a podcast, and then suddenly I go out and I'm this like really great guy in the world. No way, man. I get insecure, I get confused, I get individualistic, and you don't do this stuff. But I think just discussing it like this in the podcast, recalling that philosophy and trying to embody it more and more each day in small little ways, you will eventually make progress, and it will become more of a default state. And who knows? I mean, God only knows how your life could open up more positively if you do that. If that's the energy you put out into the world, if that's the way that you affect people, think of the doors that might open. You don't know what that looks like. It could be in 5-10 years time, but when you've built up this skill of being able to make people feel good and improve the world, then God, your life's going to get better. I mean, that's pretty much a guarantee.
Yeah, I think I guess it's social skills that are one of the highest, like, easy things to do, but could go so far.
Yep.
Things that we don't think of. There was this girl in my old flat who She asked for feedback about herself, and
That's a dangerous question to ask you, bro. That's a dangerous question.
yeah, she's the one that I said that there wasn't
What makes you different from the people upstairs or
yeah,
something?
yeah. But what I did say about her was she was very good at she had very good social skills, and that would take her quite far.
Hmm.
Because especially as a woman, that's one of the best things you can have, probably. But it's essentially like, okay, my thought around that is like, well, how many times? I think you can click with people in the universe that then you just meet people, and then it's like two different sides of the universes click, and they were kind of you were meant to connect that time, and then they end up knowing someone and introducing you to someone that really helps you in your kind of worldly pursuits. But essentially, I think this kind of comes under something that we have been talking about for a little while, of these meta skills that we. The best example would be connected to Robert Greene's work, but I think maybe that there's also other things that come under these meta skills, and yeah, I guess I would kind of want to ask, like, why should we develop them, and kind of what else do you see under this umbrella?
Yeah, it's really powerful to think about. I mean, I see that there are two types of skill. Ones that stay in that particular domain of development, and ones that can then be extrapolated to all the things you do in life, and that's known as a meta skill. So, like, I'll put it in like I do with a lot of these things. I'll put it in a sporting basketball context, right? My ability to shoot a free throw is a skill, but it's a very domain specific skill. Okay, I'm not gonna, you only shoot free throws in a basketball game. There's utility in getting good at them. You know what I mean? They're easy points at the end of the day. When you get fouled in games, they're important. It's an important skill to have. But they don't affect the way that I carry out my relationships. They don't affect the way that I study, or things like that. But the skill of the discipline to show up and shoot many free throws to get good at them is a meta skill. That discipline to continue doing repetitions and repetitions and repetitions of something is a skill that I can apply to my studying, for example. Show up and learn these theories and recall them on a podcast and practice. Kind of, I guess the skill is practice, isn't it? It's disciplined practice. That's a meta skill. And so, yeah, I'd put things like, I'd put discipline in there. I'd put social skills as maybe the biggest one. I put negative capability in there, something that I mentioned previously, that ability to sit in discomfort. Now, I see that as a physical thing, being able to put yourself through physical discomfort for the greater good, like exercise and the sauna and cold plunges, etc. I see that as a social discomfort. How do you deal with awkwardness? How do you deal with people you don't like? How do you deal with social anxiety? I see that as a philosophical thing. How do you deal with your state of consciousness? How do you deal with your existential fears about being a mortal being in an infinite universe? And I see that as an emotional thing as well. How do you deal with it when you get sad? Do you fall into a sort of negative spiral and eat shit food and stay in bed all day, or do you try and rationalize it and do something good about it? That negative capability and that ability to sit in discomfort and uncertainty and ambiguity, that's a meta skill too. And yeah, social skills generally. How do you make other people feel? I think being able to use words through the written word or the spoken word is a meta skill. And I think there are many others that I could yap about this for hours, but I think that's the meta skill idea is why I always used to say to myself during like GCSEs and A levels that there's never it's always good to try hard at stuff. Like, that's a really good simple phrase to think about, because it's not about the GCSE, it's not about the A level, it's not about the fucking result I got. It's about the skills that I developed in that pursuit. I now know how to learn things. That is a massive meta skill. And so that's why trying hard at anything you do in life is useful, because you'll gain meta skills that will then sort of snowball into other things. And it's hard to even conceptualize it, but I think there's something real here. So go on, what do you think?
I really like your example of the skill itself is shooting a free throw. The meta skill is showing up to shoot the free throw, and the discipline of doing it many consecutive days. It's like the when we first thought about it, we thought of Robert Greene, and he kind of niches these meta skills down to something like winning through action and not through argument. And so you have Michelangelo, whose skill is to chip away at sculptures, but his meta skill in this context was when the guy who he's making the sculpture for tells him, no, I want the nose to be this way. Michelangelo goes along with it and makes it seem like he's doing it the way that the guy wants him to, but is actually, I think he took like this stone and like hid a bit in his pocket or something, and so it seemed like he was doing it the way that the guy wanted him to, but then when the guy left, he then put the stone back on and managed to get it the way that he wanted to. And so when he finally finishes the sculpture, the guy's really impressed, but he's only impressed because it was Michelangelo's talent and him not listening to the guy. It would have been helpful if I knew the guy's name. The story would have been better, but yeah, you can really niche this down. Like another one would be Law 18, don't use fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. It's something that is kind of, these are kind of like ways of being. Like the idea behind that one is you want to kind of circulate yourself in the world, and everyone kind of knows that it's not good to be inside all the time and in the house. But why is that? Well, it's because you are kind of out of touch with reality. You really kind of corner yourself in, and you don't understand what's going on in the day, and you then start falling behind on how the world is working today. And when you do that for multiple weeks, then your social skills and your other meta skills, your confidence will decrease. So Robert Greene kind of synthesizes these down into common themes, common habits that we need to avoid or do more of to advance, grow, and get power.
Yeah, confidence, another great meta skill. That ability to back yourself. Yes, it can lead you astray sometimes, for sure. And yes, it has the risk of sort of evolving into egoic delusion. But the ability to just be like, no, I can do this. That's a meta skill. You need that. Even if it's foolish, like that quote you said last week, the intelligent man never becomes anything, only the fool does. It's kind of a meta skill to be willing to look silly as well. I think there's a lot to this concept. Like, I think it's definitely book worthy for me in the future. And I think it's valuable for people to think about. But yeah, that idea of somebody who, just stays inside, that's letting life pass you by. We joked a lot many episodes ago about people that happen to life and people where life happens to them. And I saw George Mack on Modern Wisdom. I just saw a little clip of it, but he had
agency.
He had this like diagram to do with agency, and it's like if you're high agency, you're happening to life, and if you're low agency, life is happening to you. And he put it on this like quadrant. Quite funny, but also very true. And I feel like, I had that this week. Like I didn't have a very productive weekend for, just reasons in my private life, and that's fine. And I get this kind of like weird feeling of, I don't know, like my drill sergeant's not happy with me because I haven't done X, Y, and Z. And then it's kind of like, I feel like life's happening to me right now. But then Monday, I went and smashed that training that was like quite grueling and uncomfortable. And then I did some work on my research proposal and made some progress. And I'm like, damn, I'm happening to life today. And even though that's on a very, very small scale, like it does affect the way you feel. And maybe that's, agency again, huge meta skill to believe that you are the captain of your vessel in your life. You are the orchestrator of your destiny. Huge meta skill, even if it's not objectively true. It's a meta skill to have that belief. But anyway, yeah, I'm happy for us to sort of close off the conversation there. But yeah, if you've got any final thoughts before we close up, go for it, man.
Yeah, just to kind of finish on that. I mean, and your specific example is good. I think it's good to take a break because you could come back with guns blazing. But then there's a question of how much should you be happening to life versus life being happening to you. Should you take the occasional weekend off work to displease your drill sergeant? And I think you should definitely lean towards you should happen to life because you need to kind of like control your trajectory. You want to, but then like how much should you be in control, or like
does that then turn into anxiety because you feel like you should have high agency in every situation when there are so many situations in life where your level of agency doesn't fucking matter, and so that's an interesting circle to square. Like there are also times where you have to accept that life happens to you rather than you happening to life. And it is funny, right? It is a sort of corny, wet phrasing and way of thinking about it. And people will, laugh at this. And if this is clipped up, there'll be some funny comments in the comment section. But like, it's a real thing. It's a real thing. How much do you feel like your life is yours? That's a very, very important question. Because if the answer is you don't know, then God, that's affecting everything in your life. That's affecting everything. That's affecting your chances to do well at work or in your studies or in your friendships or in your relationships or whatever the hell. Are you controlling this shit, or are you just a passive observer of life passing by? Because that's a very depressing way to think about our existence, I think.
I mean, if you want to happen more to life, you just have to take more risks. It's kind of as simple as that. Because the guy who is in a fortress, he stays in that fortress. He doesn't move there until he enters out. So. Yeah, I think we keep it there. There's a couple more points, but I feel like they might need. I mean, there's one here that we put. This is a tricky one that I may flash out for next week, so I think we keep it for next week.
Yeah, man.
Thanks everyone for listening.